Title: Cinderella's Magical Night begins in the quiet outskirts of a bustling 1990s city, nestled against a backdrop of majestic mountains and sprawling fields, lived a young woman named Cinderella. Life had not been kind to her. Her days were consumed by endless chores, dictated by her cruel stepmother and two self-absorbed stepsisters, Bianca and Delilah. Their grand house stood in stark contrast to Cinderella's simple, tattered clothing and her quiet, humble demeanor. Yet, despite her hardships, Cinderella's heart remained pure, and her dreams of a better life burned brightly within her. Cinderella's dreams weren't just of ballrooms and princes. She longed to break free from the confines of her stepmother's house and immerse herself in the vibrant city life she could only glimpse from afar. The city, with its neon lights, bustling streets, and endless opportunities, called to her like a siren song. She often stood on the edge of the fields, watching the glow of the city skyline against the twilight, imagining a life where she could be free to explore her passions. Cinderella had a secret. She was an exceptionally talented artist. By night, when her chores were done and the house fell silent, she sketched her dreams. Her works were a mix of surreal cityscapes, portraits of imagined friends, and vibrant depictions of a life far removed from her own. She kept her art hidden in a small wooden chest under her bed, fearing her stepmother would destroy it if discovered. One evening, as the city prepared for its grand annual gala, a masquerade ball hosted by a renowned art gallery, Cinderella overheard her stepsisters plotting their outfits. The gala was more than just a social event. It was a showcase for emerging artists, with a competition offering the winner a scholarship to a prestigious art academy. Bianca and Delilah, though talentless, were determined to use their family name and connections to impress the judges. Cinderella's heart raced at the thought of the opportunity. This was her chance to escape and make her mark. But how could she possibly attend, let alone present her work? As she despaired, an unexpected ally appeared, an elderly seamstress named Eleanor, who often visited the house to mend the family's extravagant clothing. Eleanor had noticed Cinderella's sketches and admired her talent. With a knowing smile, she revealed herself to be more than just a seamstress. She was a retired artist who once dominated the city's art scene. Moved by Cinderella's passion, Eleanor vowed to help her. With Eleanor's guidance, Cinderella prepared a portfolio of her best works and a simple yet elegant dress for the gala. But the night of the event, the stepmother locked Cinderella in the attic, determined to keep her from stealing the spotlight. Unbeknownst to them, Eleanor had a few tricks up her sleeve. She enlisted the help of some resourceful city kids, messengers, street performers, and dreamers who believed in Cinderella's talent. Together, they orchestrated a daring escape that saw Cinderella arrive at the gala just in time. Disguised behind a simple mask, Cinderella presented her art. The judges and attendees were captivated by her raw talent and the emotion in her work. Among them was a young curator, Alexander, who saw not only her artistic potential, but also the depth of her spirit. As the clock struck midnight, Cinderella fled the gala, leaving behind a single sketch, a breathtaking depiction of the city skyline under a starry sky. The sketch became her signature, and Alexander vowed to find the artist behind it. Cinderella often found solace in the fields behind the house. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, she would sit amidst the wildflowers, gazing at the city lights twinkling in the distance. She imagined a life where she was free to explore the world beyond her small, confining existence. Cinderella's moments in the fields were her sanctuary. The gentle rustling of the wildflowers in the breeze and the golden hues of the setting sun painted a serene contrast to her otherwise harsh reality. Here she could dream without restraint. She imagined herself walking through the city's bustling streets, her arms filled with canvases, her heart full of purpose. She often brought a small battered notebook and a stub of a pencil to the fields. With every stroke, she sketched her dreams, elegant buildings with intricate details, lively marketplaces filled with vibrant colors, and faces of people she had never met but felt she knew. Each drawing was a piece of the life she longed for, a life where her talent and spirit could flourish. One evening, as she sat amidst the wildflowers, the faint sound of music drifted through the air. It was coming from the city, a melody carried by the wind. It was unlike anything she had heard before, lively and full of joy. She closed her eyes, letting the music seep into her soul. And for a brief moment, she felt as though she belonged to that world. But the spell was broken by the distant voice of her stepmother, calling her back to the house. Cinderella sighed, carefully tucking her notebook into her apron. As she stood, she made a silent promise to herself. One day, she would no longer have to imagine. She would live the life she had always dreamed of, no matter how impossible it seemed now. One evening, as Cinderella scrubbed the kitchen floor, Bianca and Delilah burst into the room, giggling and chattering about the royal ball being held that very night. The prince was rumored to be seeking a bride, and all eligible young women in the city were invited. Cinderella's heart leapt at the thought of attending, but her stepmother's sharp voice cut through her daydreams. "Cinderella, you're not going anywhere," her stepmother sneered. "You have chores to finish. Besides, you have nothing suitable to wear." Bianca and Delilah smirked as they twirled in their glittering gowns. "Don't wait up for us," Delilah taunted as they swept out the door. Left alone, Cinderella felt a wave of despair wash over her. She sank onto a wooden stool, tears streaming down her face. "Why must life be so unfair?" she whispered. A magical encounter. Just as Cinderella's tears hit the floor, a soft, shimmering light filled the room. Startled, she looked up to see a kind-faced woman standing before her. She wore a flowing gown that sparkled like the night sky, and her silver hair was adorned with tiny stars. Who are you?" Cinderella stammered. "I am your fairy godmother, my dear," the woman replied with a warm smile. "And I am here to make your dreams come true." Cinderella's eyes widened in disbelief. "But how? I have nothing to wear, no way to get to the ball." The fairy godmother raised her wand, and with a flick, the room was filled with sparkles. Cinderella's tattered dress transformed into a stunning gown of deep sapphire blue, adorned with delicate silver embroidery. Her worn shoes became elegant glass slippers that glittered with every step. Her hair, once tied back in a simple braid, now cascaded in soft waves, adorned with tiny jewels. "Oh, it's beautiful," Cinderella gasped, twirling in delight. "But we're not done yet," the fairy godmother said with a wink. She stepped outside and waved her wand again. A humble pumpkin in the garden glowed and expanded, transforming into a gleaming carriage. 4 mice scurried out from the shadows and turned into magnificent white horses. A lizard nearby became a dignified coachman. "Now, remember, The fairy godmother said, "The magic will only last until midnight. You must leave the ball before the clock strikes 12. Cinderella nodded, her heart racing with excitement. "Thank you, fairy godmother. I will never forget this kindness." The royal ball. As Cinderella's carriage rolled into the city, the streets buzzed with life. The towering buildings glittered with lights, and the air was filled with music and laughter. The grand palace loomed ahead, its spires piercing the night sky. Cinderella's heart pounded as she stepped out of the carriage and ascended the marble steps. The city was everything Cinderella had imagined and more, a vibrant symphony of sights and sounds that filled her with both awe and nervous excitement. The carriage, a modest but elegant vehicle arranged by Eleanor, seemed out of place amidst the grandeur of the bustling streets. Yet it carried her closer to her dream. The grand palace, illuminated by hundreds of lanterns, stood as a beacon of possibility. Its spires seemed to touch the stars, and the cascading fountains at its entrance sparkled like liquid diamonds. Cinderella clutched her portfolio tightly, her fingers trembling. This was her moment, a chance to show the world who she truly was. As she stepped out of the carriage, the crowd at the palace entrance turned briefly to admire her. Though her dress was simple compared to the lavish gowns surrounding her, it had a quiet elegance that made her stand out. The mask Eleanor had crafted for her, a delicate piece adorned with subtle floral patterns, hid her identity, but allowed her eyes to shine with determination. Ascending the marble steps, Cinderella took in the grandeur of the palace. The music from the ballroom drifted out into the night, a melody that seemed to echo her racing heartbeat. Inside, the walls were adorned with masterpieces from renowned artists, each one a testament to the talent and creativity she longed to share. A kind attendant greeted her at the door, directing her to the registration desk for the art competition. Cinderella handed over her portfolio, her hands steady despite the storm of emotions within her. The attendant, a sharp-eyed woman with an air of authority, flipped through the pages, her expression softening with each turn. "These are extraordinary," the woman murmured, looking up at Cinderella with a newfound respect. "You must be very proud of your work." Cinderella offered a shy smile. "Thank you. It's all I've ever dreamed of." The woman nodded, motioning for Cinderella to follow her. "Come with me. We'll make sure your pieces are displayed in the best light." As they walked through the grand hall, Cinderella caught glimpses of the other contestants, wealthy socialites and established artists, all dressed to impress. Doubts began to creep into her mind, but she pushed them aside. She was here now, and she would not let fear hold her back. The attendant led her to a smaller, more intimate gallery space where her work was carefully arranged. As Cinderella watched her dreams come to life on the walls, a sense of pride and hope filled her heart. This was her chance to shine. Unbeknownst to her, a pair of curious eyes had been following her since she entered the palace. Alexander, the young curator and host of the gala, was captivated not only by her art, but by the quiet grace with which she carried herself. Intrigued, he decided to introduce himself. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere was electric. Chandeliers cast a warm glow over the crowd of elegantly dressed guests. The music swirled, and laughter echoed off the gilded walls. As Cinderella entered, a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to her, captivated by her beauty and grace. Cinderella hesitated at the threshold of the ballroom, her breath catching as the grandeur of the scene unfolded before her. The chandeliers, adorned with countless crystals, shimmered like stars, casting a golden glow that danced across the marble floors. The music, a lively waltz, seemed to carry the very soul of the evening, while the laughter and chatter of the guests wove a tapestry of joy and anticipation. Her entrance was unintentional yet magnetic. The delicate simplicity of her gown, paired with the elegance of her mask, set her apart from the extravagance of the crowd. Whispers rippled through the room as guests speculated about the mysterious newcomer. "Who is she?" someone murmured. "She's enchanting," another replied. Cinderella felt the weight of their gazes but stood tall, her heart pounding. She reminded herself why she was here, not for the attention, but for the chance to share her art and find her place in this world. As she moved further into the room, the spell of her presence seemed to draw people aside, creating a path that led directly to Alexander. The young curator standing near the orchestra had been watching her since she entered. He was struck by her quiet confidence and the way she seemed to embody the very essence of the evening's theme, the transformative power of art and beauty. Gathering his courage, Alexander approached her, offering a warm smile. "Welcome to the gala. I don't believe we've met before. I'm Alexander, the curator of tonight's event." Cinderella dipped her head in a graceful nod, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "It's an honor to be here. I've admired this event from afar for so long. And now you're part of it," Alexander said, his eyes alight with curiosity. "I couldn't help but notice the way everyone is drawn to you. It's as if you belong here." Cinderella's lips curved into a soft smile. "Perhaps tonight I do." Their conversation was interrupted by the announcement of the art competition's opening. Alexander extended his hand. "Would you allow me to escort you to the gallery? I'd love to hear more about your work." Cinderella hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his. "I'd be honored." As they walked together, the crowd parted once more, their whispers following them. Cinderella felt a surge of confidence, as if the dreams she had nurtured in the fields were finally within reach. The prince, a handsome young man with kind eyes, was the first to approach her. "May I have this dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Cinderella's cheeks flushed as she nodded. They glided across the dance floor, the world around them fading away. For the first time in her life, Cinderella felt truly seen and cherished. The stroke of midnight. The hours flew by in a blur of music, laughter, and whispered conversations. Cinderella and the prince shared stories and dreams, discovering a deep connection that neither had expected. But as the clock began to chime midnight, Cinderella's heart sank. She remembered the Fairy Godmother's warning. The vibrant energy of the ballroom seemed to dim in Cinderella's mind as the first chime of midnight echoed through the grand hall. Each resonant note felt like a countdown, pulling her back to the reality she had momentarily escaped. She turned to the prince, Alexander, who was mid-laugh, his eyes sparkling with the joy of their shared stories. Her heart ached at the thought of leaving this magical night behind. I have to go," Cinderella said abruptly, her voice trembling with urgency. Alexander's smile faltered, replaced by concern. "Go? But why? The night is still young." She shook her head, taking a step back. "I can't explain. Please, just remember tonight. Remember me." Before he could respond, she turned and fled, her gown billowing behind her like a silver cloud. The guests parted in surprise as she wove through the crowd, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The chimes of the clock seemed to grow louder, each one driving her forward. As she reached the grand staircase, one of her delicate glass slippers slipped from her foot. She paused for a fleeting moment, her instinct to retrieve it, but the urgency of the clock compelled her to keep running. Behind her, she could hear Alexander calling out, his voice laced with desperation. "Wait, please, don't go." But Cinderella couldn't stop. She dashed down the marble steps and into the waiting carriage, which took off the moment she climbed inside. The city blurred around her as the horses galloped toward the outskirts, the magic of the evening fading with every passing second. By the time she reached the fields near her home, the transformation was complete. The elegant gown was gone, replaced by her simple, tattered dress. The carriage had vanished, leaving only a faint imprint of wheels on the dirt road. Cinderella stood there, barefoot and breathless, clutching her pounding heart. In the distance, the lights of the city still twinkled, a bittersweet reminder of the night she had just left behind. She whispered into the cool night air, "Thank you for letting me dream, even if only for a little while." Back at the palace, Alexander stood on the marble steps, holding the glass slipper she had left behind. Determined, he vowed to find the mysterious woman who had captured his heart and shared her soul with him in just a few short hours. "I must go," she said, pulling away from the prince. "But why?" he asked, his eyes filled with concern. "I'm sorry, but I can't explain," she replied, dashing out of the ballroom. In her haste, one of her glass slippers slipped off, but she didn't stop. She ran down the palace steps and climbed into her carriage, just as the final chime echoed through the night. As the magic faded, the carriage turned back into a pumpkin, and Cinderella found herself standing alone in her simple dress. A new beginning. The next morning, the city buzzed with news of the mysterious woman who had captured the prince's heart. The prince himself was determined to find her, using the glass slipper she had left behind as his only clue. He visited every house in the city, searching for the one whose foot would fit the delicate shoe. The city was alive with excitement and speculation. From bustling markets to quiet alleyways, everyone was talking about the prince's search for the mysterious woman who had vanished at the stroke of midnight. Some whispered romantic tales of love at first sight, while others spun wild theories about her identity. Alexander, driven by a mix of determination and longing, personally led the search. The glass slipper, delicate and shimmering like a fragment of a dream, was his only link to her. He visited every corner of the city, from the grandest mansions to the humblest cottages, leaving no stone unturned. At each house, hopeful women lined up, eager to try on the slipper. But no matter how many tried, none could make the shoe fit. The prince's frustration grew with each failed attempt, but he refused to give up. He couldn't forget her, the way she had spoken of her dreams, her laughter that had felt like music, and the spark of understanding that had passed between them. Finally, Alexander's search brought him to the outskirts of the city, to a grand but fading house that stood in quiet contrast to its lively surroundings. Inside, Cinderella was scrubbing the floors, her hands raw and her spirit heavy. The magic of the previous night felt like a distant memory, and she had resigned herself to the reality of her life. When the prince arrived, her stepmother, ever the opportunist, quickly presented Bianca and Delilah, each insisting that they were the woman he sought. Bianca pushed her way forward, her foot far too large for the delicate slipper, while Delilah nearly cracked the fragile shoe in her eagerness to force it on. Alexander's disappointment was evident, but he noticed a quiet figure in the background, her face downcast and her hands trembling. Something about her seemed familiar, though she made no move to come forward. "Is there anyone else in the house?" Alexander asked, his voice calm but firm. The stepmother hesitated, her smile faltering. "No, Your Highness, only my daughters." But Alexander's sharp eyes caught the flicker of fear in her expression. He stepped past her, approaching Cinderella directly. "May I ask your name? May I ask?" Cinderella looked up, startled, her heart racing. I'm just a servant, Your Highness. Surely you don't mean me." Alexander knelt before her, holding out the slipper. "If you would allow me, I'd like you to try this on." Her stepmother protested loudly, but Alexander silenced her with a glance. Cinderella hesitated, her gaze shifting between the prince and the slipper. Slowly she extended her foot, and the shoe slid on perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Gasps filled the room, and the stepmother's face twisted in shock and anger. But Alexander's expression softened into a smile, his eyes filled with recognition and joy. "It's you," he said softly. "I knew I'd find you." Cinderella felt tears well up as she met his gaze. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that her dreams could become reality. When he arrived at Cinderella's home, her stepmother and stepsisters eagerly tried on the slipper, but it was too small for them. Just as the prince was about to leave, Cinderella stepped forward. Cinderella hesitated at first, her heart pounding as she watched the prince turn toward the door. Her stepmother and stepsisters glared at her, their expressions a mix of panic and fury. But something deep within her, perhaps the memory of the magical night or the dreams she had cherished for so long, gave her the courage to step forward. "Wait," she said softly, her voice trembling but steady enough to be heard. The prince paused, turning back to see her standing there, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. Her stepmother quickly interjected, her tone sharp and dismissive. "Oh, pay no attention to her, Your Highness. She's just the maid. She couldn't possibly be the one you're looking for." Alexander's eyes, however, lingered on Cinderella. There was something in her presence, a quiet grace that felt achingly familiar. Ignoring the protests of the stepmother, he approached her directly. "May I ask your name?" Cinderella hesitated, glancing at her stepmother, who was now seething with barely contained rage. But she met the prince's gaze and found warmth and encouragement there. "My name is Cinderella," she said, her voice soft but clear. Alexander knelt before her, holding out the glass slipper. "Would you do me the honor of trying this on?" Her stepmother and stepsisters gasped in outrage, but Cinderella didn't hear them. Her hands shook slightly as she reached down, slipping off her worn, tattered shoe. With a deep breath, she extended her foot, and the glass slipper slid on effortlessly, fitting as though it had been made just for her. The room fell silent, the moment heavy with realization. Alexander looked up at her, his expression a mix of relief, joy, and admiration. "It's you," he said softly, rising to his feet. "I knew I'd find you." Cinderella felt tears welling in her eyes as she met his gaze. For For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that her dreams might come true. But before she could speak, her stepmother stepped forward, her voice sharp and desperate. "This is impossible. She's just a servant. She has no place at your side." Alexander turned to her, his tone firm and unyielding. "Her worth is not defined by her status, but by her spirit and her heart. And I see now that she is the one I've been searching for." Cinderella's stepsisters began to wail in protest, but Alexander extended his hand to Cinderella. "Will you come with me, Cinderella? There's a place for you in my life, and at my side, if you'll have it." Cinderella looked at his outstretched hand, then back at the stepmother and stepsisters who had tried so hard to keep her down. With a deep breath, she placed her hand in his. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I will. May I try?" she asked softly. Her stepmother scoffed, but the prince nodded. As Cinderella slipped her foot into the shoe, it fit perfectly. The prince's face lit up with joy. "It's you," he said, taking her hands in his. "You're the one I've been searching for." Overwhelmed with happiness, Cinderella smiled. "Yes, it's me." Happily ever after. Cinderella's life changed forever. She and the prince were married in a grand ceremony, surrounded by the beauty of the mountains and fields she had once dreamed of escaping. Though her stepmother and stepsisters were invited to the wedding, they watched with envy as Cinderella's kindness and resilience were celebrated by all. Cinderella never forgot the magic of her fairy godmother or the struggles that had shaped her. She used her newfound position to help others, ensuring that no one in her kingdom would ever feel as hopeless as she once had. And as she and the prince danced under the starlit sky, Cinderella knew that her magical night had truly been the beginning of a life filled with love, adventure, and happiness. At the end, Cinderella and Prince Charming lift up their hand and say goodbye to everyone at the palace.
The Stories book is a captivating collection of tales that traverse diverse genres and emotions, spanning the realms of fantasy, science fiction, romance, and mystery. Each narrative is a journey into the unexpected, weaving intricate plots and compelling characters. With a skillful blend of vivid imagery and thought-provoking themes, this anthology invites readers to explore the depths of imagination and discover the universal threads that connect us all. From heartwarming moments to spine, we hope you enjoyed these captivating video stories. Be sure to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming content like this. Thanks for watching and keep spreading the video story.